Let's go ahead and let's kick off today's webinar, which is Bionic Software Engineering, Escape from the Code Sprawl. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. My name is Todd Blaschka, and I will be facilitating today's webinar. We are fortunate to have two experts in software development with us today. We have Rishi Singh, who's CEO and co-founder of Sapient AI. And we also have Anubhav Shrivastava, who's VP of Engineering with Nightfall AI. Thank you both for joining us today. And in this webinar, we're first going to talk about what is Bionic Software Engineering. We are also going to cover some other key topics around conventional coding assistants. Are they fulfilling the hype? And how are they being used in today's software development process? We'll also dig into code quality and software quality, specifically around AI-driven testing solutions. What's happening there? What are some of the new trends? And lastly, we'll cover some best practices around AI assistant development. I'd first like to ask both of our presenters today to just give a quick background on each of yourselves and your experience in this area. And we'll start off with Anubhav. Over to you.
Hey everyone, I'm Anubhav Shrivastava. I'm VP of Engineering at Nightfall.ai. Nightfall.ai is a data protection and encryption platform. Apart from security, the one domain where I spend a lot of time is the software delivery and the developer productivity, where I work with Rishi at Harness, and that's the area very close to my heart. I keep following the trend and just pretty actively engaged. Yeah, so looking forward to having a good discussion here.
Yeah, wonderful. Hey, thank you, Anubhav, and thank you, Todd, for getting this started. So, as Todd said, I'm founder and CEO of Sapient AI. But other than that, I think I also co-founded another company, Harness. It's been more than 8 years ago. That company has grown pretty big. I think most of the people who know about Harness, it's a leader in the software delivery space. And what this really means is software developers are able to create the delivery pipeline. They are able to have the system in place where they could ship their code all the way into the production environment in a safe and reliable manner. And before that, I was at Apple, and I think I was working on some of the products, which is touching the developers and the DevOps areas. Throughout my career, I think I have been extremely passionate about this developers' productivity, the developers' efficiency, developer experience, the kind of areas. Now, the recent trends, the AI has taken, a lot of responsibility. It has making the difference in the life of everyone, including the software developers. So I'm very, very excited about it now. This is the topic, the bionic software engineering and how, this is affecting the software developers' the lifestyle is very, very interesting, very, close to my heart. So I'm looking forward to this discussion. Glad to be with Anubhav, who is a good friend of mine, who was at Harness, building, an amazing software company from the very early days. So looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you both. Well, let's dig into just to level set. Bionic software engineering is a term that is just starting to get some more noise in the developer community. What is bionic software engineering? Why don't we start with Anubhav on the definition? What is bionic software engineering to you?
Sure, and I think bionic in general, the term, you could, depending on the domain, it could mean very different things, but to the core of it is really enhancing human skills, right? Now, it comes to software development aspect of it, it's really enhancing every aspect of software delivery. So if you think about from your source code starting point, well, even before when you're trying to project manage it, right? From there, you write the code, you test it, you deploy. This whole journey, all of it is being touched by some or the other way, artificial intelligence and the recent advancements in the machine learning side, right? So it's generating code automatically, being able to test them, code review, being able to deploy. All of that really is getting enhanced, and probably all of that kind of encapsulates bionic software engineering.
How is that shaping your approach to software development with Nightfall?
Well, I think the first and foremost for any software is the speed, right? That's the key. Like, a firm believer that, there's nothing you could build something which cannot be replicated. It's really the constant pace of innovation. And these tools allow you to do that. They allow you to keep rapid pace, and with the limited resource. So that they're really, really effective. And as I said, right, it's every aspect of your software delivery, even resource planning to bottleneck to be able to write the code and deliver. So it definitely really, really useful. Every tool has its own plus and minuses, so you have to just balance your act, but definitely helping a lot.
And so let me take that over to Rishi and get a little bit more of his perspective. And what I think would be interesting to understand from your experience, Rishi, is how do you look at prioritizing which tools and for what functions in the software development process? Because applying Bionic software engineering across, with multiple tools in multiple functions at once can have, significant challenges. How do you look at how to prioritize?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So I think this entire area of the AI or the bionic software engineering is pretty new. There is no very well defined, the pattern. They're not the industry standard. They're not the best practices that has been rolled out to all the developers. And I think this is where the important thing is to analyze some of the strengths and the weaknesses. As Anvo was, talking about, bionic software engineering, this is very, very helpful, but it can play its role in the different areas. And, when it comes to the software developers, it's really like, the journey starts all the way from the requirement gathering into the project planning. Once you have the project planning done, how do you implement it? How do you follow the really, the software development hygiene, get things in place, get it committed into the repository, and eventually you're going to deliver the code into the production. And so what has happened in recent time is there are so many companies that have come. They all have come from the different angle. They all have the different strengths. Some of the companies, they are really awesome tool which can look at the Jira software, which can look at some of the epics. It can break it down into this menu and this user stories. It can help the software developers do the better, the project planning. But then there are the tools that are helping to take this user story, help them implement it. There are the tools that are helping them do the bug fixing, the testing. There are the tools that are helping them to, do it. So I think one of the important thing probably we'll have to look into it is use the right AI tool instead of just getting stuck with one. The reality is, if there are the tools, and especially like, given that we have got like diverse set of options, you could potentially use it in a way, that is not necessarily going to impact the whole cycle. And so you can gain the value out of it. And, the thing that you have to make sure is that it doesn't leave any kind of negative impact. The topic of, this webinar is about this code sprawl, how do you escape from the code sprawl? And it is, maybe I'm jumping ahead, but like, the code sprawl is one of the major challenges that you will come across, especially for the software developers. So we have to look at the strength on these bionics, the software engineering, of these AI coding assistants, and just leverage their strength. Wherever there, it falls into, some of the limitation, probably we just have to be more diligent, and then only we should use it.
Yeah, if I could add one thing that Todd, you asked me how effective it has been at Nightfall. I can recall a very recent example of it. We were trying to build endpoint agents, and really, basically, that what it means is building agent for Mac, Linux, and Windows. We are brilliant engineers here, but we didn't have in-house experience of building this. And these tools have been really effective in learning while you're building, right? So definitely these are pretty powerful tools as long as you're using it with the limitations known.
One of the points that was just brought up in this part of the conversation is, not only bionic software engineering, but also code sprawl. Now, is code sprawl getting better or is it getting worse? And with AI coding assistants that have really, moved into the mainstream over the last, couple of years, what are you seeing with code sprawl and how are you addressing that? Let's start with you, Anubhav.
Sure. Yeah, I think you said, is it getting better? Is it getting worse? I think it's probably along the way, somewhere in between. It's gonna get better, but at this point, the problem is pretty clear. What happens, when you're generating these codes, if you're not careful enough in terms of reviewing with the correctness of it, effectiveness of it, and really whether it is done in the way which is suits your code base, right? Like a lot of times software engineering is compared with building house, right? You're building a base, you're layering things on top of each, right? And if you just ask AI to build a wall, it might just build the base again. So how are you reusing the existing thing in your system, in your code base, and leveraging and building on top of it is very important. What it leads to, you have a bloated code where there are repeated things, harder to maintain, harder to extend, harder to debug, right? So definitely it's there. There's one other aspect of it, which I don't know if you want to call it code sprawl, but as a developer myself, I would be a little bit annoyed with that, the stylistic choices, right? You always use kind of coding standard for your project and so on, but still developer A versus developer B, there will be stylistic differences. And when you're using AI, which style is that, right? And how do you live with that? I think that all of that is definitely a concern in general. Is it big enough to do away with these tools? Definitely not. That's not the suggestion. It's just that are you aware of these and then working around it.
No,
Right.
thank you for that. Over to you, Rashid. Would love to get your perspective on code sprawl, and is AI coding assistance making this a bigger challenge for your organization?
Yeah. No, so I think it is an issue, and before I go dig any further, let me just tell you what is the code sprawl. What exactly are we talking about? Just to make sure like everyone understand. The code sprawl essentially means like there is too much of code, and it's unmanageable code, and what the code is not an asset. Code is a liability. It sounds a bit anticlimactic because anytime when you write some code, when you build a tool, when you see the functionality, when when you see the tool is delivering the value, we all get excited about it. Like this is exactly what we want. But the reality is that these codes need to be maintained, right? Somebody has to own it. Somebody has to know how, and when that there are the changes, someone has to maintain it, make it suitable for the the latest requirement. And in the reality is, even if you don't change the requirement, the technology is always getting out of date. And so as a company, when I make some investment to build a tool, I would also, I'll also be forced to make some kind of commitment to, maintain this tool and maintain the code, have the right personnel who understand the code and, they're able to do it. And so this is the reality that, the code is not not an asset, it is a liability. And so what has happened in the recent times, especially with the AI coding assistant, is writing code is no longer expensive. It's very, very cheap. You enter some kind of prompt, you give some kind of instruction, maybe to the ChatGPT or, maybe to some of the AI coding assistant that you're utilizing. It will go and it will fetch a lot of code. And you tend to, bring those code, as a part of the repository, it will bloat it. And so more code that you have it in repository, that means you are adding more burden on yourself. And so it is getting a problem for sure. There are, not a set solution for this. There are some best practices. There are other things that people can do. But this is how, the code sprawl is becoming a major problem with this AI coding assistant by having too much of a boilerplate code making the way into the code repository.
So as a follow-up to what you just talked about there regarding code sprawl and using AI within the developer tools, what are some best practices that you are seeing not only within your company but also in the industry where you can integrate AI into the existing tool chains without causing code sprawl?
Yeah. Anwar, do you want to take it? Do you want to share or do you want to?
Sure. Yeah, I think that like any tool which has like massive implication, you start slow. So and It allows you to do many things. So we'll just start breaking it down, but really identify a team, a set of developers where you start to experiment with these tools and really see if the effectiveness of the process, right? How it is impacting your development process. Once you have that, you start kind of customizing it for your needs, right? Like what kind of stylistic choices you have, what kind of coding standards you have. Does this tool suit your need, right? Uh, the other important thing I would think about is having a complementary tool. You have a code generating tool which is producing a lot of code, but that's not the only thing, right? The testing side of it, the other aspect of it, right? So having tooling on the other side of the equation is also important. So complementing them with other tools. So if you have a code generating tool, you probably need a tool to generate test cases as well. You need a tool to probably do code review as well, or sort of do kind of checks in terms of what kind of coverage you have, what kind of static analysis you could do, right? Obviously, monitoring all of these, right, and reiterating over it, and training and kind of documentation over this would be the starting point I would think about. I'd love to hear from Rishi.
No. So I think that's really a good point that you touched, Anubhav. The one thing that I have observed with most of the AI coding assistant is it's extremely powerful in the natural language processing. And it doesn't surprise us. Let's not forget, like, most of these coding assistants are coming from the large language model, which is heavily tuned for the natural language processing. So, as an average engineer, you'll be surprised that when they are having this day-to-day work, they often struggle. Like, let's say I made a lot of changes, and now I'm just thinking about how should I summarize, what is the comment going to look like in my commit message, what is the description that I should put it in my the pull request, how what is the kind of comment that I should include in the code, that makes things easier. So some of these things are comes very naturally to this AI coding system. So one of the things that I would prescribe, from almost all the developers, like use these features, whether it's a code review, the documentation, the commenting, doing the commit message, the pull request, almost like use this AI coding assistant, extensively. There shouldn't be any reason to, send a some sort of the mediocre message. You often see the developers writing, oh, this method changed. Yeah, we are well aware of this method change. We could see the difference in the code repository. The thing that we have to be careful about is the coding side. I think, right now, at least in the current state, the AI coding assistants are not perfect. I think this is where we have to be diligent. And, something that I'll add on to what, Anubhav shared is, bring some kind of specialized AI solution for the respective areas. This is where the generalist, the AI coding assistant that happen to claim everything, it will do the functional code generation, it will do the testing, it will do the code review, it will do everything. And this is where it fails. Some of these are specialized AI solutions, specialized into the testing, specialized into the code review. It will do a better job. And the more important thing is, let's not become over reliant or the myopic on things that is coming from the AI coding assistants. You have to maintain this extreme diligence. Look at the artifact that is being produced by this AI coding assistant, and then make a decision whether everything is making sense before you include it as a part of your code repository.
So following up on that, let me start with a question, follow-on question to Anubhav. And this goes into when you're, how can your development teams, ensure that they get the maximum test coverage while using, when they're using AI tools without compromising the code quality? There's the efficiency and the velocity that these tools can do in terms of development acceleration, but the other part is maintaining high code quality. What's your experience in how to work with that as a key driver for your organization?
Yeah, I think the first thing starts with measuring this, right? So I think, and these are kind of basics, right? Having some kind of code coverage analysis so that you know where you stand today and you're kind of constantly measuring it. Make sure they're part of your CI pipelines. They run all the time with every PR. Things break. You feel good about it, and you also see the value of writing these tests, right? I mean, test pyramid still holds good, right? So unit test, and then you have an integration, and then your end-to-end test. Every layer of it has to be, improved and worked on, right? But you work on the unit side of it more, and then so on. So having them sort of, part of a CI pipeline where you can see run to run, you can also enforce some of these practices. Okay, percentage of coverage has to be this much. It cannot go below that, no matter what. So some of those are basics, right? From there, I think what you could do is like, use some of the tooling, existing tooling, which you're talking about bionic engineering here, like use those to generate. It's incredibly hard to write tests. It's a code, right? Well, I'm sure Rishi is going to say not anymore, but let me say this: it is a, in a way, it's a code, right? And it needs to be maintained, it needs to be refactored, it needs to be enhanced. And as you extend your features, you have to keep writing more and more of it, right? So it's hard. And if you are using, some kind of AI assisted generation, then it makes your life easier, right? I think to the point where Rishi was saying, you change something, and I mean, refactoring is one of the very effective way of managing the code sprawl, to be honest. Like you constantly keep refactoring, making sure the code base is optimized. But we all know how hard is refactoring. You sometimes see this is a one-liner change I can make, or a few lines I can make it effective, but 100 of tests is gonna break, and who's gonna take care of that? So you have to make these things easier for developers, and that's where they would be more motivated. First, they would see the results of it, it's measured, it's enforced in a way as well, and then you're providing tooling to generate that and allowing them to sort of move with the pace, right? So I think some of these things are pretty core of, if you want to achieve a high test coverage.
Anything to add,
Yeah.
Rishi?
Yeah.
I see Anuhal sort of egging you on a little bit with some points of view. What about what's your take?
Yeah, so I think probably the most important thing, is sort of directive that, what do you call it quality? Like what is the acceptable quality? And that has to be determined at the level of the organization, or at the level of the team. And probably you'll have to come up with some kind of tooling. How do you enforce it? What kind of, the governance rule that you want to do it, how exactly that will get translated in, as a quality gates. You set some kind of percentage, and you want to make sure, each and every developers are complying with those quality gates, they are following things. But then, the next thing is how do you implement it? And I think this is where, you do make use of the tools that are specialized for the quality. And so there are the generalist tools, there are the generalist AI coding, the assistants, there are the tools that can do it. More often, it will fall on the cyclomatic complexity. What this really means is that, when you write a code, like there are a lot of if then else statement, there are a lot of, some of these statements which will take the overall execution into the different code blocks. And, by default, these tools will try to give the same weightage to each and every block of the code. And so essentially, like, when you think about like, three if then statement, if it's a 3-level deep, like, 2 times 2 times true, like, it's almost like, 8 different scenarios. And, you'll end up writing a lot of the test code, in order to address the quality, and that could potentially take you to the code as well, right? So number one thing is that you have to, probably you should explore some kind of specialized tool, which is just for the quality. There's a second thing that I have done, what I have seen in my practice, especially with this AI coding assistant, is it is driven by the prompt. And so you can be more specific in your prompt, telling what to cover. You have to emphasize a bit about this important code block, which is relevant for the quality. So you can do that. And then, probably the most important thing is, to remain connected. I think, do not just, just a AI, use the AI coding assistant blindly. And I think that's where, you can champion the best quality, but at the same time, you don't get into the trouble increasing the overall, the volume of the code.
What are the common pitfalls you see when when using AI for development?
Yeah, I think there are a lot of pitfalls. I think I'm sure, like, there are, if you go on the internet, if you search, there are so many things that has been talked about. There are the security level concern. There is a code privacy. There are other things, one of the biggest thing, that I see is over reliance on this coding assistant. And so as a developer, you end up giving the control to the coding assistant. Coding assistant is producing certain things, and you just accept it as a source of truth, the ultimate source of the truth. And I think that is a mistake, because the AI coding assistant might not have the exact understanding of what exactly you're looking for. You'll end up implementing something that you might not want. So these are like the common pitfalls that you'll see. I can go on and on. Anubhav, like, do you want to share your perspective?
No, I think I'll echo the sentiment. I agree with those. I think two things that you said were pretty interesting, and maybe I can just re-emphasize this whole privacy concern, right? Like when you're using some cloud APIs, what kind of data is being shared in terms of, and the code is pretty important, data for the company. So security risks are there, privacy risks are there. Have been talked about so many times over this topic. Similarly, I would talk of say the biasness or the limitations of the model, right? Because all of them are based on how good the data they are trained on. And there are many of them, and there will be many more coming up, right? So what are the biases are there in terms of how they got trained? Knowing about those will actually help you, avoid those pitfalls. One other thing I want to touch upon is, since we talked about quality of, these, right, tests and safety net, I think having high test coverage is one aspect of it, but really the quality is like how effective those tests are, right? So we're talking about Bionic approach here, an ability to sort of having you to write some test and augment the tests which are generated is very, very important. I can recall one example from Harness. I think Rishi wrote that piece of software. We used to call it workflow engine, which is the brain behind deployments. It's the most complex thing you can think of, doing deployment on thousands of machines. Every machine has hundreds of steps, or maybe more or less. And it could be on all over the place on different machines. So this is a highly concurrent state machine, right? And you think about test cases, 100% coverage is one of the things you want to do, but that's not your biggest concern. The biggest concern is what all can go wrong from network, from system level, from your own orchestration or parallelism. It's just so use a tool which allows you to extend. There will be need where you have to have a balanced approach, so yeah, I would say those are the few things you want to take care of.
Yeah. That's a really, really important point, Anubhav. I think, again, the key is that, I can see a pattern where people become over-reliant on the AI coding assistant. They're just, their perspective is much more narrower. And, in long term, it always bothers me, actually, that this can essentially lead to, what I call it, like, this erosion of the innovation and creativity. And what I really mean is that if you look at like the last few decades, the pace of innovation has gone extremely high. And one of the biggest reason is that is the massive collaboration that you can get it over the internet. You can bring some creativity, you can share it across the globe. There are the other people who can learn from your work. They can get inspired from your work. And this is what is happening. But the moment when you stop exploring, the moment you're no longer doing the Google, you're not looking at all the 10 and 12 different options that you get in on the first page of the Google, and then you click on the button and you can just learn about it. And then you start determine like which one is the best option, and what are the other possibilities that you can be inspired from the options. It's not a good thing. And I could see that as a developer, it's extremely productive. It's a very efficient that my AI coding assistant is going to the Stack Overflow, finding some solution, getting some solution into my IDE without me going into the Stack Overflow and learning about it. But that is the challenge that I see. That is one of the biggest pitfall that I can tell, that there is a the serious erosion, there could be a serious erosion of this innovation and the creative over long term if we continue with this approach.
Well, one of the things you started alluding to, and I wanted to take the conversation a little bit in a direction towards some other innovation happening within AI development, and that's the AI powered testing tools. There's new approaches and innovation happening in this area. Yorishi, your company Sapient is one of the companies that's helping to transform code quality and testing. What are I'd like to start with you, and then hand it over to Anubhav. But what are some of the benefits and challenges you see with in AI powered testing tools in general?
Yeah. So I think when you think about the AI or the AI coding assistants, or there are so many the AI different solutions. There is a one common approach, which is there are the models. Models are smart. It's learning based on the data. It's learning based on the work that is done in the past, and it is capable of creating the new work on the pattern that it has seen so far. The software testing is one of those things. The industry has come a long way. The back in days, people used to do the testing manually. Then they came up with some sort of testing automation. So not only you provide some input and output and you test it manually, but you have ability to codify the entire process, and you end up writing some code using some kind of standard so that this entire process of testing could be repeatable. And I think this is where we all have to understand that we can use this power of the AI, but not necessarily just evolve on the existing pattern. But we come up with sort of new radical ideas, and use the power of the AI to come up with the new approaches. I think the Sapient AI has been doing exactly the same thing. When it comes to the software testing, we had this realization, based on our conversation with the users, our customers, many of the folks, our partners, that the AI is extremely efficient in churning a lot of code. You can generate hundreds and thousands of lines of the code in a very short span of time. But by the end of the day, that's creating the code sprawl. Who is going to own and maintain it? And so we questioned. We went back to the foundation of the real fundamental of the software testing, where we come up with the approach where we can test the entire software in a codeless manner. And so, going back, looking into the code and test it out, let's capture this input and output and test it out in the codeless way so that we don't have to go through the code sprawl. So, Todd, I think maybe I can just share the screen a little bit, what exactly I mean by the code sprawl, because most of the time,
I was going to ask you if you had something to share there, because that sounds very, very fascinating.
Yeah. I think, are you able to see my screen? You might see my IntelliJ.
Yes.
That
yes, we do.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So, it's a very simple code that I'm sharing, which is a user service, and it has a method called isValidUser that takes user ID and password, and it goes through the few steps. Essentially, it's trying to validate whether these are the right combination. But like a typical code, it has some steps, like if user ID is null, throw some exception, else fetch it from the repository, else try to match it the password hash and get the result back. Right? Very simple code. But when you see, these codes are quite interdependent. Like user repository is calling user service is calling, the user repository, and so on. And so what happens is that let's say, tomorrow I had this realization that the user repository find by ID is not working well. Well, I need to introduce some additional parameter called string org ID. So guess what? Hey, these are interconnected, and so there are some problems. There are some problem that has to be addressed. Before I can just roll it out. I have to change. Here. Maybe I'll have to provide a new value. What is the new org ID going to be? Maybe the Sapient or whatever. I'll have to do these things before I could roll out these changes. Right. So there are the three places probably I'll have to make the changes and so on. Now let me show you what happens if you end up generating the code in a traditional way, right? So you still have the same user service. Now I end up generating some test for it. And so, I could use the GitHub Copilot, I could use any of the AI coding assistant. This time around, I'm going to use the Sapient AI to generate the regular unit test code, right? So again, this is not a codeless. This is just related to these things. 1 second. Let me just give me a second. So maybe there are some code that has come in, and maybe I don't need this code. These are like, unnecessary code. And so let me just get back trying to. All right, so looks like there are some more code that has to be deleted in my project apparently. All right, this is successful. This is nice. So coming back to the problem that I was showcasing, that how these codes are interrelated, and just making the changes becomes much harder when you have too much of a code. And so now I'm going to generate some some unit test code. So it's the same user service. Now I'm able to generate the unit test code. And so here we are. There are probably 200, 300 lines of the code that has been added as an extra code in my repository. So here I'll do exactly the same experiment that I was doing before. So here's a find by ID. Now I'm trying to introduce this extra parameter, string org ID. Now, if you notice the last time, it was 3 problems. This time around, I have a 15 problem. And so, the making the code changes, doing the refactoring is extremely important because codes are never static. It's always evolving. So the more code that you have, if there is a code sprawl in your repository, then it becomes much more harder for anyone to make the changes and do the refactoring and do all the things. So this is the problem that I'm trying to avoid, that we should not have the code sprawl. We should not have the code repository bloated because it makes it very harder. I'll do another approach where we don't use a regular unit test code. We don't use the traditional approach of generating the code. I'll use the codeless way. And so I'm removing this code. It's too much of a code to deal with. And so we'll do exactly repeat the same step. Here's the find by ID. I can introduce string. Well, let me just first try to let me just take a step back. Let me just try to generate a test for it. And so here we are. This is the codeless test. So the codeless test is based on the input and output. And so all the all the possible test cases will be addressed using input and output. So for example, here these are the different methods that we have, and you could see there are the various input and outputs and related execution status. So we have just been able to do it. Now, if we make some code changes like I was doing before, just okay, this Zoom is coming in the way. So imagine that I ended up introducing a code change, and so there are some changes that has to be made because I have refactored the code. And so let's say I'm just adding Sapient as a sort of default value wherever there is need. Okay. I'm not sure how to refactor this. So for the time being, maybe I should just get rid of this method, and so that I don't have to deal with more things. So hopefully my project is compiling. Let me just double check. Oh, good. So here we are. Let me try to regenerate the code, regenerate the test. And it did come up with the list of suggestions. So, there are some methods where, it was user ID null. Now this is like user ID one recipient. This is null. So I still, I'm able to manage all my testing. We still have the 100% code coverage. There are some methods that are getting deleted and so on. I would just accept all of them. This is all good. And now everything is working, I'm able to do it. So this was an example where I just software engineer, I have written some code, I'm making some changes. And for me, it becomes, the 10 times harder to make the changes if I have too much of a code in my repository. On the other hand, if I just take an approach where some of the tests or some of these things are addressed as a part of the codeless way, I have the list code in my repository. It's very, very easy for me to make the changes. I still have to make some adjustment, make some refactoring, but those are very minimal, and I don't have to spend too much time doing that. Hopefully it made sense for everyone.
Yeah, I don't have to say anything on this. I think with this demo, we could cover all the things we talked about before. It just clearly shows you right there. Just simple things, refactoring can lead to test failures, and then you have a test. In this case, it was all written by Rishi, but in reality, it's not going to happen. So you have to figure out what this means, and the evolution of code base is just the nature of it, right? So how do you cope up with that? Yeah, I think.
I mean, with that, and thank you for showing us, codeless testing and the innovation there. Are there other advancements in AI assisted development that you're excited about, that you also think are going to have a big impact? It's very clear that codeless testing is taking software quality to another level for developers' ease of use, and as you mentioned, being able to reduce the amount of code in the repository for it. So from anything else that you're excited about in software development with AI? Let's start with Anuha.
Sure. Yeah, I think a couple of things which we talked about today in terms of we're talking about every code base is different, every team is different. Would love to see AI coming up and kind of adaptively learning how a particular code base is structured, and then suggestions are more tailored for that. So the problem where you have to really review very carefully whether it's deviates from your practices is lesser and lesser, and it becomes more effective, right? That's something number one. The other thing, if you think about in software development, one of the expensive piece is whole infrastructure, right? And code take infrastructure you have to running on the machines, and then if you have thousands of developers, hundreds of developers, they are running their PR. So it takes. If you have a way to sort of prioritize or predict what tests are more better to run first, I think that definitely some of the improvements you can bring in the how you effectively and how fast you can. So you actually not only save on infra, you also save on dev cycles, right? Obviously, if you look at test pyramid, I think unit test, we just saw the demo. I think there's a lot happening in this, but there's a lot more can be done on the other layers, which are much more harder as well. As we go up in the layer, the dependency increases in terms of integration test, API test, or end-to-end test, right? So I think I would love to see, equally powerful tools in those aspects as well. And I guess the eventual holy grail is to have end-to-end software delivery, right? You have a end-to-end software delivery life cycle is assisted through an AI and done, right?
Oh, thank you for that. Anything else you'd like to add, Rishi?
Yeah, no, I think Anubhav covered it really, really well. I think in general, the entire the AI coding system, the entire the Bionic software engineering is going to be better. I think, the overall accuracy level will be much better. It will be more mature. There won't be any kind of hallucination, like you're asking for something, but it's implementing something else. There won't be like that. There is another, the trend that I see and that I'm really, really excited about is, the AI coding assistant started with the code completion. So almost like, give a prompt, it will do the research over the Stack Overflow, bring some kind of code based on the learning, it will do it. But it's getting mature and it's trying to cover the entire life cycle of the software developers. And it's also turning in the agent form. And so, another interesting thing that is happening in the industry is, there is a growing trend of the local execution of the large language model. So it's no longer large language model, actually it's known as like the small language model. And, I do see that, there will be like, more number of small language model where, that you can run it on your desktop and run it locally in your environment. You could, train it, you could contextualize with your own code base, your pattern, your coding standards, your best practices. And these large language model will be able to help you without bringing the concern, from the, the security and the privacy, right? So I see these trends going on. Obviously we have a long way to go. I don't think, it will be like a typical, the bionics that we see it in other areas, especially in this mechanical engineering, where you can hand over the responsibility to some of the robots and, it can do things in an autonomous way. As for the software engineering is concerned, it will remain a sort of assistant where there is a huge oversight required from the software engineers, the software developers. They will be receiving a lot of assistance from these assistants. But the software developers will remain in charge. So those are the trends that I can see, and I feel very, very excited about it. I think these things are getting better. In the end, it's going to help software developers become more productive, as well as they will have a better experience. I think their life will improve.
Awesome. I think we talked about a lot of aspects of AI assistant code generation, quality. I love camping. I go to camping pretty often, and there's one thing I could recall as a parallel. It's like trying to light a campfire with a flint and steel, and then someone arrives with a flamethrower. It's the flamethrower we have got at our hand. It could do the job very efficiently and quickly, but there are risks as well, and you have to be understanding of that.
Exactly. You need to have the oversight, and I think that is the trend I see will continue at least for a fairly good amount of time.
Great final thoughts. I just wanted to open it up and see if there's any questions from the folks that are attending. If there are, feel free to add them in the chat. Okay, I don't see any questions in chat right now. That must mean that this has been extremely a very thorough discussion on Bionic software engineering. And I want to thank both Rishi and Anubhav for taking the time today to share your thoughts and experiences in this area.
Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. Thank you, Rishi, for hosting.
Great to have this conversation. Thank you, Anwar, for joining. Thank you, Todd. Hey, looking forward to have a more conversation like this. Thank you, guys.
Thank
you.
Thank you.